So a few days ago, we got the news that Dame Olivia de Havilland has passed away at the age of 104, which is a long life by any measure. But when you're a Hollywood A-list actor, I don't know if there's many others that have become centenarians. Of course, the other famous one is Kirk Douglas, who also passed away this year at 102 or 103, I should say. Um, so that's interesting that the two longest lived, arguably, A-list names in Hollywood both pass away in the same year, both centenarians. So with the passing of Dame Olivia de Havilland and the eulogies for her, I thought it would be a good time to review Gone with the Wind. Now, this isn't going to be like my normal film reviews in the sense that I'm not going to talk about the plot so much, more about how I feel about the film and the perception of the film today, because this is something of a talking point. Um, so Gone with the Wind, it doesn't really need any introduction. It's a very famous film, and it is generally regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. It's just my DVD cover. No copyright infringement intended. That's a very famous poster. Winner of 10 Academy Awards, including the Best Picture for 1939. Um, so the film stars Clark Gable, Vivian Leigh, Olivia de Havilland, Leslie Howard in the four lead roles. But there's also an important supporting role by Hattie McDaniel, who is notable as the first African American to win an Oscar, and she got that for Best Supporting Actress. Um, Gone with the Wind is unquestionably an epic film. And when I think about it, the first thing that comes to mind is that grand scale. Um, Just some other information about the film. It was directed by Victor Fleming, but there was a bit of a musical chairs with directors apparently. I didn't realize this before. I've literally just read this on Wikipedia. The original director, George Cukor, was fired shortly after filming began and was replaced by Fleming, who in turn was briefly replaced by Sam Wood while Fleming took some time off due to exhaustion. Um, Dame Olivia de Havilland's done interviews about the film, obviously, and she mentioned that it was actually not a production that was inevitably going to be made. There was some resistance in Hollywood to this being made, and that's incredible when you think about it, given the status it has in the film industry. Um, Adjusted for inflation, it's the highest grossing film ever made. Um, and the theme tune, known as Tara's theme, which is named after the plantation where the film is largely set, um, is one that I actually remember it playing. It used to be when you went into the cinema screen, and if you arrived quite early before even the trailers, they'd always play the theme from Gone with the Wind in the dark, just as you're waiting, and it was just very special feeling. It's cinema magic. It's got that feeling about it. You just know when you hear that music, you're going to see an epic. The costumes were lavish, the design sets were lavish, massive production. So, that opening scene, I think it might be the best opening scene I've ever come across in a film, or certainly one of them. David O. Selznick production. Then you see huge letters, "Gone with the Wind." Um, if you don't know the film, basically it's set during the American Civil War in the state of Georgia, and focuses on the lives and loves of an Irish American wealthy aristocratic family, the O'Haras, and a philandering character, Rhett Butler, and his love affair with um, Scarlett O'Hara, played by Vivian Leigh. The Gable Lee on-set romance, I think it's fair to say it's one of the most famous ever on screen. Um, and it's just, it's become an iconic thing about cinema. I'm not sure how they got on off screen. Interesting thing is, according to Haviland, Gable was actually quite nervous about whether he could deliver it or not, whether he could, whether or not he would let people down. And that's interesting because he carried such confidence. I mean, Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood in the 30s, basically. Um, there's that famous Judy Garland song where she's singing to Clark Gable kind of in awe, and he's just carried such masculine confidence, and it's I think the thing with Gone with the Wind, it's so simple in a way because Clark Gable is the confident, strong, or you know, let's say confident man that every guy wants to be. Vivian Lee's a beauty. It's it's very innocent. It's very simple in a way, but it's just I mean Vivian Lee without question one of the most beautiful women ever. And it's just the stuff of Hollywood legend. When you have someone like Clark Gable and Vivian Lee on screen together, um, I do think Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet carried that as well in Titanic. I think it was a similar thing. These are the great love stories of cinema history. Um, and there's only a very small handful of other examples, but that's probably Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler is the most famous, um, possibly. Uh, so what else can I say? I'm just thinking cinematically here. Like I say, lavish sets, beautiful score, very impressive score. Okay, I should address some of the perceptions of the film today because whilst this is still a very beloved film, and it is, and that was clear when Olivia de Havilland died. Like there was a lot of talk of Gone with the Wind and people saying it brought back good memories and stuff. There's no question about it, though. The film was biased. I think it's undeniable. And before people get put off by this, by the way, I just want to give my perception and why I think that that doesn't matter, at least in terms of how we perceive a film's cinematic appeal. So, throughout the film, a running theme is the Noble South and the Lost Cause. In fact, the title Gone with the Wind comes from the best-selling novel by Margaret Mitchell, which was published in 1936, 3 years before the film was released. The film's in Technicolor, and some older films are better in black and white. For example, 12 Angry Men, which is another great film, I think is better in black and white because it carries that sort of courtroom drama. It's a 1957 film. Um, a Night to Remember, 1958 film, is also good in black and white. Gone with the Wind works very well in Technicolor because you have for example, the blood red sunset coming up over the plains of Georgia, the really bright daylight scenes, the lavish costumes. I don't think any of that could have been captured with a black and white film. Of course, Gone with the Wind was released the same year as The Wizard of Oz. So 1939 was a huge year for cinema, and they were both directed by Victor Fleming. I have a theory about Gone with the Wind, actually. I think that the timing is significant in terms of its popularity. Released in 1939, the world was on the brink of World War II. Americans weren't in the war at that point, but I think American audiences would have been looking at Europe, and this is it's an epic, but can also be called a war film. And it goes from basically Scarlett O'Hara is a bit of a brat, to be quite honest. She's this beautiful young woman, typical Southern belle, very spoiled, very all the men want her. But then in the second half of the film, she's sort of brought down to earth and she's humbled due to the difficulties of her circumstances. There's a famous scene, of course, from Rhett Butler, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. One of the most quoted lines in cinema history. But my point is, with Gone with the Wind, I think that people, although it's set in the American Civil War, people were sort of looking at what was happening in Europe, and maybe the film brought them some sort of reassurance in some way that you could overcome war, because in the end she does prevail. Although, like I say, the film is very much from a southern perspective. Margaret Mitchell was a southerner, and there is controversies around it. I can't make a video about Gone with the Wind without mentioning this. At the start of the film, the epilogue sort of reads there was a time of cavaliers and their fair ladies, and do not look for this land because it only exists not in pages of books, but is gone with the wind. That's not verbatim, but it's along those lines. Um, it's almost gushing in its praise of the South and the noble South. All the depictions of slaves are sanitized. There's no well, basically doesn't depict slaves except brief scenes where they're working in the fields. The black characters in the film, particularly the character of Mammy, um, Hattie McDaniel, like I say, was notable as the first African American to win an Oscar. That's an interesting role because, on one hand, I've noticed like modern day black actors are reluctant to criticize Hattie McDaniel for taking on the role, a role that many see as a racist stereotype. She plays very much a sort of submissive mammy character, very, um, you know, many would see it as a racist stereotype. In fact, I can maybe show. No, I won't. I've got the film playing in the background, but it's ongoing. It's ongoing, and I don't want to get any copyright issues anyway. Um, but Hattie McDaniel herself was proud of that, as she should have been. And others have said that they can't criticize her because it paved a way for them. I know that Spike Lee was very critical of that, and he has used it in a lot of the politics in his films as sort of an example of how Hollywood portrayed black people at the time. Um, I do think Gone Will Win, it would be definitely it's definitely got a romanticized vision of the South. There's no question about that, particularly the first half of the film. The Union is totally portrayed as the great invaders. Sherman's March on Atlanta, which was a borderline scorched earth campaign, although, as far as I know, there weren't, for example, mass atrocities against Southern civilians. There was some looting, there was some. So the film isn't entirely wrong in that sense. However, the one time we even see a Union officer in the whole film, he's creeping into the plantation, and Vivian Lee and Olivia Havilland, the Havilland, see him coming in, and he's a sinister northerner, and we assume he's going to violate the fair southern ladies. So it's propaganda. There's no question about it. But does that mean it's a bad film? Absolutely not. I think you can appreciate a film cinematically whilst recognizing that it's it's dated in the sense of its ideals, or at least in the sense of its some of its themes. But that doesn't mean that Gone with the Wind should be regarded as a bad film because it did have some politically incorrect depictions of things, or let's say outright Southern propaganda, which it was. It doesn't take away from the fact that it's a great film. I feel the same way about music. If, for example, you get a best-selling musician, it's suddenly arrested for really bad crime, murder, rape, you name it. Does that mean that their music is suddenly invalid purely in its own merit? I suppose the argument would be if you have music or a film that is given a particular message, and then the messenger is implicated in something that really contradicts that, that could perhaps destroy the message. So let's say a musician is singing about, say, an anti-racist song, and then they're found to make some racist remarks on Twitter, whatever. That's going to be a contradiction. It's going to be a hypocrisy, and people will pick up on that. But um, I don't think you can say that, well, because there's a controversy, that suddenly means that people are complex. I think someone can be talented. I think someone can deliver something great and not be a very nice person. Some of the most famous people and most successful people in history haven't been very nice people, and they've got quite controversial backgrounds. But doesn't take away, their artistic greatness. And I think it's the same with films. Gone with the Wind isn't a perfect film in today's context, but it's damn near one of the best films ever made in terms of its cinematic appeal. And I don't think anyone can really deny that. I've even seen people well on the left who, are very vocal about things like Black Lives Matter, and even they acknowledge it's a great film. So that's my thoughts on Gone with the Wind. If you haven't seen it, see it. It's just a masterpiece, cinematically speaking. Um, it is full of propaganda, and I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. It is. No denying that. Um, and yes, there are some overly simplistic depictions of African Americans, but I think the film should be judged on its worth as a cinematic experience. Um, and it's an epic. So, Thanks for watching.